Just a reminder, Randy Staples is going to be joining us in about 30 minutes, and we'll be talking about some activity going on at the state capitol, even though no one is in any legislative session, but a lot of planning going on right here, dead smack in the middle of summer. That's on the way a bit later in the program. A lot to talk about, obviously, today. It was quite a whirlwind weekend when it comes to news. After hearing all of these newspaper reports and these television reports and these radio talk shows, all talking about the GOP convention last week and how it was disorderly. And in this day and age, you can't have a disorderly convention because it hurts your branding, if you will. Your branding as a Republican Party, whatever it is today, because Donald Trump certainly isn't a traditional Republican in the sense that I've known Republicans, at least since the Ronald Reagan era. We heard that all through the end of last week, how the Republicans were disjointed, disorganized. People were saying it. Donald Trump himself, when he delivered his remarks, was dystopian, that he has a dark vision of America and the world. And then over the weekend, everything hit the fan for the Democrats, just as they're getting ready for their big party in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which is opening today. And you ask yourself, is this more a disease that has just spread throughout the political world, maybe across the planet, versus just one particular political party? Because it does seem, I was sharing on my pre-show video, some of you know this, I do a video on Facebook, try to do it just about every day before the actual radio show. It's a little preview perhaps of what we're going to be talking about. But over the weekend, we're all creatures of what we experience. I sat down and I binged-watched Revelation Road movies. Now, there are more of them coming. After the third one, we're left off with a dead end at the tail end, where all of a sudden Brian Bosworth, who's a motorcycle gang leader, shows up and joins the main character again. But now we know that they're likely both Christians and they're both going to go out and fight the battle together instead of opposed to each other. But I watched all three of the first three movies in the series. There are more coming. And then yesterday, I just stumbled on this while I was on Netflix yesterday. And I'm translating it from German. The English title is Look Who's Back. And it's a little bit like the Terminator. In the Terminator, there's this, the lightning bolts, and then there's a bunch of smoke and fog, and all of a sudden there's a guy from a different time who's suddenly been delivered to our time who goes out and wreaks havoc all over the planet. Well, in Look Who's Back, you see this sort of fog and smoke rolling up at a park in Berlin, Germany, and who's there but Adolf Hitler? But the movie is a comedy in many ways. Who would think about Hitler ever going and getting his dry cleaning done, for instance, and arguing with dry cleaners about whether they can dry clean his undergarments too, and the like, and then seeing Hitler leave the dry cleaners wearing a golf outfit because he has nothing else to wear while his uniform is being dry cleaned, and then touring the country in a florist van with big roses on the side. It was very funny, but it shows you how someone can seduce a population. Not just once, but maybe twice, because he ends up becoming a hit on the internet as well as a huge TV star, because people don't realize it's really him. They think it's an actor playing the role, but it's really him. And at the end of the movie, he's riding around with a television executive, and they're in the back seat of a Mercedes convertible, and Hitler is being saluted, not in a what we would call, I guess, an Allied way. He is being saluted in a Nazi way by many people he passes on the street. So my weekend sort of changed perhaps my worldview, at least for a day. And now I'm coming into this week with the Democrats getting together after this trove of emails was dumped. And it turns out that the Democrat National Committee is a den of vipers. And they were looking to undermine Bernie Sanders. They're apparently anti-Semitic, even though Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, who was the chairwoman, apparently you would think wouldn't be that way as she's Jewish. But they were looking to embarrass Bernie Sanders because they thought in the Deep South, well, hey, he's not a Christian. We'll be able to take advantage of that. And they were working against him, even though the committee is supposed to be neutral. And we also discovered that the Washington Post apparently had an event with Hillary Clinton, which she used as a fundraiser. So the Washington Post is now tainted because it was working along with Clinton to raise money for her campaign. We also learned that reporters, a political reporter, for instance, sent over an entire story so the DNC could look it over before he wrote it or reported it, and that they had approval on what a lot of their fellow travelers and media happened to be doing. Now, we're not surprised by any of this. We've known it for years, but now the evidence is coming down. And each day there are new revelations from these emails. And now Hillary Clinton is trying to blame it on the Russians, who she says would like Mr. Trump to be president. And this is just ridiculous. Some of the charges that are being made. Well, Russians or not, if you didn't want to be in trouble, you wouldn't do this unethical stuff in the first place. And the fundraiser with the Washington Post, if it's not illegal, it could be, but if it's not illegal, it could be unethical. So here we are this Monday morning, middle of summer in the calendar year 2016, and you've got to be wondering, and the shooting in Florida overnight. You get up every day for crying out loud, and it's something new like this. It's either a political scandal, or it's a terrorist attack, or it's a shooting where several people are shot and killed and many, many more wounded. And we're perpetually walking around our streets looking at flags flying at half-staff. My friends, this is not a normal time. And with Mr. Obama, who's now caught between a rock and a hard place because he's trying to promote gun confiscation, but on the other hand, he can't say America is too violent because if he does that, then that favors Donald Trump's campaign. And Hillary Clinton did him some favors, so now he needs to repay her. So he has to say America is not as violent as Donald Trump portrays it to be. And every time he opens his mouth and says that, a group of people get shot within a few hours. Actually, I read some statistics on this. America's crime rate had been plummeting for decades, but over the course of the last 2 years, big spikes. And it's not just some cities, it's basically all cities. The homicide rate jumped, I believe it was last year, about 6.5%. That's a whopping number in 1 year. And it's up again already this year. So he can't have it both ways. He says crime is up, so he's going to come take your guns away. Yet he has to say crime's down because if he says crime's up, so we're getting mixed messages coming out of the White House. And if they were really interested in the country and instead of, cheering for their team, let's make sure that we get all of our blue shirts reelected this year so we can prevent the red shirts from actually getting a seat on the bench is what this is all about. They're fighting for their teams. They're not fighting for the country. And it's been a long time since anybody, at least at the highest levels of American politics, has had the interests of the common man and woman in mind. It's 8:15. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com. Donald Trump Jr. was asked about this claim that the Russians are behind this email dump from the Democrat National Committee. He was appearing on ABC. No, it was CNN, I believe. With, is it Jake Tapper at CNN? Listen to Trump's response.
You hear it with the DNC, where they're leaking emails about Bernie Sanders and his Jewish heritage to be able to try to destroy him in the South. It's a rigged system. It's disgusting, and the people should be fed up, because when I heard it, I certainly was. There's nothing wrong with a fair fight, Jake. I don't mind a fair fight, but these lies and the perpetuating of that kind of nonsense to try to gain some political capital is outrageous, and he should be ashamed of himself. If a Republican did
President
that,
Obama,
they'd be calling for people to bring out the electric chair.
That man's father is being labeled in the media and by liberals in this country as a racist and a fascist and a bigot. You name it, that's what they're calling him. And yet the Democrats inside that office at the Democrat National Committee did everything but call Bernie Sanders the K word. So it's a bit like the pot calling the kettle black, isn't it? And don't they have any shame over there? I mean, that's the other part of all of this. Last night, Hillary Clinton and her now number two, Tim Kaine, former governor of Virginia and a U.S. senator. The man has had all sorts of elected offices. In fact, he's done nothing else but serve in government. We've got these professional politicians now who know of nothing else in life but that cushy experience. The two of them appeared on 60 Minutes so they could take softball questions. And, of course, Hillary Clinton used that as her opportunity, open-ended opportunity, of course, to go after the other side.
I know, and Tim knows, because we both have heard from many Republicans how distressed they are at the direction that Donald Trump is taking their party.
Now, she says that means a lot of Republicans are going to vote for her, which doesn't explain in the latest CNN poll why Mr. Trump has surged to a 5-point lead when he was not so long ago behind, and in fact, he is well ahead now in many other national polls, despite the dark and dystopian speech he gave the other night. Maybe he touched something with the American people. Maybe it resonates with them. They know they're being played.
I don't know what their convention was about, other than criticizing me. I seem to be the only unifying theme that they had.
Well, now we know what your convention's about. We know, of course, that you have an issue with telling the truth, and your entire party has an issue with dirty tricks. So here we go into Philadelphia with this opening up. Oh, and did you see this as well? They have built an 8-foot wall, 4-mile perimeter, an 8-foot wall, fence, around the convention in Philadelphia. Now, I know where this is. What they do is the football stadium, the baseball stadium, and the arena. The arenas for hockey and basketball. They're all located on the same property. They're right down there by the Navy Yard in Philadelphia. And I've been there to watch baseball games. It's a nice, wide, open area with broad streets and trees, and yet they've sealed it all off. And some people are now saying, well, if a wall's a bad idea on the southern border, then why do you need a wall, this huge perimeter around your convention site in Philadelphia? And after all, you claim everybody loves you. You said everybody else dislikes Mr. Trump, and they had to go out. And as it turns out, of course, a lot of these Trump demonstrations were organized within the Democrat National Committee. They were phony demonstrations, but the media reported them as if they were legitimate. In other words, we got our marching orders from Debbie Wasserman-Schultz. Let's go out there. How bad is it in the media? The media critic Howard Kurtz was on TV yesterday morning, and as this story was breaking and Schultz was being forced to resign, he pointed out that the story was buried by the New York Times. They didn't report it on page 1. They didn't report it on page 2. They didn't report it on page 3. They didn't report it on page B1. It was buried somewhere about page 27 in the newspaper with a couple of paragraphs, and that was it. Do we now know who the enemy happens to be in this country? Because we have not only the worries, the fears about the terrorists who are coming here, and the crime that is racing through the streets, and BLM, not talking about land management, I'm talking about Black Lives Matter, which is working hand in glove with foreign terrorists in its efforts to disrupt this country. And you've got the media and the Democrat Party working in collusion with them. We have a short break coming up. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310. KLIX and newsradio1310.com. As I mentioned, Randy Staples will be joining us in about 20-25 minutes for his weekly visit from Idaho Weekly Briefing. That's on the way this morning. Bernie Sanders, by the way, apparently still going to endorse Hillary Rodham Clinton, even though it is now clearly obvious she stabbed the man in the back. We may be seeing the return of Dr. Jonathan Tripp this week in our studio. Dr. Tripp, if you didn't know, was on a mission trip in Nicaragua with his family. And when he gets back, we're going to have a special day, not just a Wednesday, but we're going to have a special day set aside where we'll sit down with him and he'll tell us all about the trip. No pun intended, and fill us in about what happened. But we do want to remind you, every Wednesday morning between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, we have an opportunity to speak with the doctor here on air or one of his associates, and you can also telephone in and perhaps get some medical advice. We call it Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, which is located on Fillmore Street here in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. Believe we have a caller with us. Caller, you're with us on air on KLIX. All right, thanks for the patience. Or lack thereof. Well, the doctor would say that, wouldn't he? 824, Bill Colley with you at 60, I'm going to call it 64 right now. And you're listening to News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, and you're on air.
Good morning, Bill. Bill, the term progressive makes me sick. The Democrats proudly label themselves as progressives, but what is so progressive about what they do? Detroit and Chicago for years was controlled by progressives. My hometown had 2 million people, but now Detroit is a city in shambles. There's less than 1 million people living there. Chicago is also broke, owing millions of dollars for retired pensioners. Girls and women are often raped, and many people are being murdered and crippled. What is so progressive about these Democrats?
That's a great question. Nothing. You might want to call them the regressives, because it's about regression. Every major city that they've gotten their hands on and then controlled for decades is today a basket case. And all they do is then turn around and ask the state governments or the federal governments to bail them out. In other words, we made a mess of it. We want all of you people out there who are more responsible to come bail us out. That's the way they work. Now, that works until all of a sudden the people at the state and national levels no longer can bail you out. That's the problem in Chicago. The state is also broke because it's run by the same Cook County political machine founded by the Daley family, which ran that city into the ground and allowed the mafia to flourish, and now allows street gangs to flourish, and now has what? Homicide after homicide after. You have to track them hourly, not daily. No pun intended there either. 826, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, 736-0300, 736-0300. Nate Silver from the 538 blog, I believe it's called. Both people on the left and right in politics say that he is very accurate when it comes to predicting election outcomes. Last week, he said the lock Clinton had was gone, that it's now a much more wide-open race. He also says that Tim Kaine does nothing to improve Hillary Clinton's chances in this year's election. Many people thought she would pick Cory Booker because Booker, who is a person of color, would bring along many of those people that Obama brought out in 2008 and 2012 who may now be sitting on their hands at home. Tim Kaine, by the way, speaking on NBC's Meet the Press last month, not recently, but last month, made a statement about classified documents and the handling of those. Take a listen.
I can't take classified information I get as a senator and give it to somebody with no consequence. Freedom of speech has reasonable limits. Freedom of assembly, we can protest, but you can't march onto the floor of the Senate and do crazy stuff. No, there's going to be rules and regulations. And the Second Amendment is exactly the same.
So that's a loaded statement. Number one, he says you can't mishandle classified documents. Well, at least if you're Hillary Clinton, you can get away with it, but nobody else can. And then he goes off to say that, none of your God-given rights are actually absolute. Dangerous, dangerous man. You're up next, coming up on 828 on KLIX. Go ahead.
Good morning, Bill. I've had some few discussions with some left side leaning people this weekend, and it just amazes me how many of them say that Hillary Clinton did nothing wrong because she wasn't prosecuted. There's a difference between being prosecuted and doing something wrong. And if you laid it out, it'd be one thing. So I finally told them, I says, this is funny. Us on the right sit here and we do law black and white. It's black and white. And, there is a little gray area here every once in a while. But on the left, they seem to use clay and be able to mold it any way they deem necessary.
Well, you just mentioned in Chicago. Think about this. Al Capone was never convicted for killing anyone. He was convicted for tax evasion. So does that mean that he was not a cutthroat killer?
Well, by their own admission, Bill, aren't they the ones that stand on a little stump and talk about how there are people in jail that are wrongfully accused?
Right.
I mean, the double standards every day just never ceases to amaze me.
Because again, as I said earlier, they're not thank you for the call too. They're not interested in country. They're interested only in getting their own hands into the graft machine and then passing that graft out to members of the team. The country is circling the drain. The world appears to be circling the drain. They will not acknowledge that we have a terrorism problem. They will not acknowledge that we have gang problems. They will not acknowledge we have a crime problem. And again, as I said earlier, that doesn't make any sense. If there's no crime problem, then why do they have to take my guns away? But it's all part of their grand master evil plan. Randy Staples will join us in 15 minutes from Idaho Weekly Briefing. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Randy going to talk to us about, even though there's no session going on, work's still taking place at the state legislature. Details ahead. Bernie Sanders, I guess I was talking in my pre-show video on Facebook about struggling with forgiveness. Sanders, by the way, says unlike some of the folks at the Democrat National Committee who thought he was an atheist, he is not. So that does mean he does believe in a higher power. But I was talking about how I struggle with various issues such as forgiveness and why you better get that one down before the end comes for you or perhaps for everyone. But I have to say that he is obviously, despite whatever faults he may have, he is pretty good at forgiveness because he's going to let sleeping dogs lie when it comes to what the Democrat National Committee did to him. He's still going to go ahead tonight and endorse Hillary Rotten Clinton. 8:34, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Thank you for listening today. If you're having difficulty, though, hearing us, you need to get in touch with Dr. Christine Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology. That's in Rupert, the only locally owned independent hearing healthcare practice now in southern Idaho. And she reminds you people are living longer, healthier lives, but that decline in your head can continue to be a major concern. People with hearing loss have a much greater risk of developing cognitive decline, which can lead to dementia. The greater the loss, the greater the risk. Keeping your hearing healthy is an important part to overall wellness. Knowing your hearing status and doing something about it can lead to a better, healthier life as you get older. Now is the time to schedule that evaluation. Call Mount Harrison Audiology. That's 312-0957. Sanders, by the way, making an appearance on ABC's This Week with George Snuffleupagus, says, hey, I tried telling all of you, not that it's going to do him a whole lot of good right now.
Well, I think I told you long time ago that the DNC was not running a fair operation, that they were supporting Secretary Clinton. So what I suggested to be true 6 months ago turns out, in fact, to be true. I'm not shocked, but I am disappointed, and that is the way it is.
So maybe we can all learn something about forgiveness from Bernie Sanders. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on KLIX on Top Story.
Yeah, good morning, Bill. I was just thinking that, was it WikiLeaks that released 19,000 emails from Hillary Clinton? I just wonder how many of the Russians and Chinese have that you said you never sent.
Now, thank you for the call. Today, I did do some reading on this morning, and this dump just before this convention is obviously going to embarrass her. However, there is a belief that if the Russians and the Chinese did get access, and James Comey said it was entirely possible they did, to all of her emails, her personal emails from her home server, that they indeed have those, and those we'll be hearing about come October. Now, Hillary Clinton has had a tremendous slide in the polls. It all started after Comey's news conference and then a lack of an indictment. And then people said, well, Donald Trump will not get a significant bounce out of the Republican National Convention. But I'm seeing polls this morning that say otherwise. Trump has gotten a huge bounce out of that. And frankly, any more bad news for Hillary Clinton could seal the deal. And if they keep saying there's no crime to be worried about in this country and there's no terrorism to be worried about in this country, for crying out loud, folks. You know what? Back in the days of the old Soviet Union, which no longer exists, it rotted away and collapsed, and now we have just the detritus left in the much smaller Russian Empire. But the government would come out and make pronouncements and say things that everyone knew to be false. And you lived with all of those falsehoods. There were people who were running tractor factories who were issuing production quotas because if they didn't issue these stellar quotas, they would end up in some serious trouble. And so they kept fabricating all of their quotas, which weren't true. But then people in government passed those along. Everybody in the country eventually knew it was baloney. And yet people kept going along with it. And then one day they no longer did, and the whole system came tumbling down. You've got people in politics right now. You've got Barack Obama saying crime is not up. There's no such thing as an Islamic jihad taking place against us or the West. You've got Hillary Clinton making the same claims, John Kerry making the same claims. Do you think that people any longer are buying that? Because I've got to tell you, you ask most people about their own experiences. Teenage boys riding their bicycles in Twin Falls, Idaho, get shot at the gates of a beautiful gated community because someone took a disliking to them at a basketball court over at a nearby high school. That, my friends, is a crime that we do not have normally in this part of the country. But these things are happening. And we're seeing it everywhere. It's a callousness as well about human life. And to be in denial as these people are, well, hey, 60 million babies have died over the last 40 years in their mother's wombs, maybe more now. That figure may be outdated, and these people have just simply whistled past that graveyard. I guess we can't expect a whole heck of a lot more. Randy Staples is on the way with us in just a few minutes from the Idaho Weekly Briefing. We'll be talking with him about some activity going on, state legislative activity, right here in dead smack in the middle of summer. That may seem unusual, but it's not. Details ahead.